Live NFL trivia every Tuesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge and have a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. Picture this. You're the general manager of an NFL team, and you just acquired a Pro Bowl receiver in a trade. You acquired one of the best receivers in all of football, and you got rid of a locker room cancer in the process. The guy you acquired could be the missing piece in your offense, and could play an instrumental part in your team's success going forward. And then, 3 weeks after acquiring him in a trade, you decide to trade him. Trading a star player still in the prime of his career after 3 weeks is incredibly strange, and it doesn't seem like something that would happen in the NFL today. Yet in 1970, that's exactly what the Pittsburgh Steelers did. The Steelers made a big trade at the end of August to acquire star wide receiver Willie Richardson from the Baltimore Colts. And then, after 3 weeks, they traded him to the Miami Dolphins. What causes a player to get traded just as quickly as they got traded for? Well, we're about to find out. This is the story behind what might just be the most surprising trade in the history of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Before I talk about the actual trade, we need some context as to who Willie Richardson is, because it will help us to understand why he was so important in the first place, and why this trade was surprising. In 1963, the Baltimore Colts spent their 7th round pick on the Jackson State wide receiver, and despite being drafted inside the top 20 by the New York Jets in the rival American Football League, Richardson decided to play with the Colts. Over his first 4 seasons with the team, he was buried on the depth chart. He started just 6 games and had just 500 yards receiving in that stretch. It made sense why he couldn't crack the starting lineup or get a whole lot of playing time. On one side of the field, you had Jimmy Orr, a really consistent receiver throughout the 1960s who would even be named a Pro Bowler and a first-team All-Pro in 1965. And on the other side of the field, you had Raymond Berry, one of the greatest receivers of all time, and maybe the greatest receiver of the pre-merger era not named Don Hudson. But in 1967, Richardson was finally able to crack the starting lineup. And after 4 seasons of riding the bench, when he became the team's starting receiver, he made the most of that opportunity. In 1967, Richardson may have been the best receiver in all of football. Quarterback Johnny Unitas won the MVP, and the Colts only lost 1 game that season, and Richardson was a big reason why. He finished the season with 63 receptions, which ranked 3rd in the league, only behind Charlie Taylor and Jerry Smith of Washington. His 8 receiving touchdowns ranked 8th in the league, and his 860 receiving yards ranked inside the top 10 as well. If you were to take every receiver in football in 1967 with at least 60 receptions, 800 yards, and 8 touchdowns, the group would consist of Charlie Taylor and Willie Richardson. That's it. For his efforts, Richardson was named a Pro Bowler and a first-team All-Pro. He followed that up in 1968 with another strong season, where he made the 2nd Pro Bowl of his career and guided the Colts to a win in the NFL Championship and an appearance in their first Super Bowl in franchise history. He once again finished the season with 8 touchdown catches, which ranked tied for 5th in the league. And he did this by averaging a career-high 18.9 yards per reception. And he was instrumental in that playoff run. You can make an argument that the Colts don't even get to the Super Bowl without him. In their playoff game against the Minnesota Vikings, which the Colts won 24-14, Earl Morrall completed 13 passes for 280 yards. 6 of the passes and 148 of the yards went to Richardson. And while he didn't make the Pro Bowl in 1969 or receive any accolades, he still had a really solid season, posting 43 receptions for 646 yards, increasing his catch output from the 1968 campaign. Things were looking great for Richardson and the Colts, but entering the 1970 season, things were about to get a bit weird. In 1970, there was a new man in charge of the Colts by the name of Don McCafferty. Don Shula left the team following the 1969 season to become the head coach of the Miami Dolphins. This won't be the last time that Shula pops up in our story, so keep that bit of foreshadowing in mind. And despite some great numbers by Richardson over the past 3 seasons, and despite his play being a critical reason why the Colts consistently boasted one of the best offenses in football, whether it was Johnny Unitas or Earl Morrall under center, there was some stiff competition for the starting spot. One report a few weeks before the season summed it up best. Last year's starters are all back, and none of them might start. Apparently, Richardson's job was in serious jeopardy under McCafferty, who wasn't thrilled with him. At one point when the season drew closer, Ray Perkins would overtake him on the depth chart. And yes, that's the same Ray Perkins who would eventually go on to coach the New York Giants and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Meanwhile, in Pittsburgh, the Steelers were having a problem of their own. Roy Jefferson was one of the best receivers in all of football. In 1968, he made the Pro Bowl after leading the league with 1,074 yards, and finishing 2nd in receiving touchdowns with 11, only 1 behind Cleveland Browns receiver Paul Warfield for the league lead. He became just the 2nd player in Steelers history, alongside Paul Moss in 1933, to lead the league in receiving yards, and he followed that up in 1969 by improving his reception total from 58 to 67 and his yardage from 1,074 to 1,079. He was named a Pro Bowler again, and for the first and only time in his career, was named a first-team All-Pro. Jefferson was well on his way to becoming the greatest receiver in the history of the franchise, but he was starting to feud with head coach Chuck Noll. In 1969, Jefferson got into a fight with Noll after Jefferson was sent home prior to a preseason game against the New York Giants after staying out past curfew. During this training camp, on multiple occasions, he parked his car in an area where he wasn't allowed to park, and came to multiple practices without a helmet. While there was not necessarily a single action that was over the top, it was an accumulation of little things that was straining this relationship. And considering the fact that the NFL and the NFLPA were experiencing some tension around this time, and Jefferson was the team's outspoken player rep, Noll was done with Jefferson. As Jefferson later said, "I was considered a rebel. The team thought I was not a good guy to keep around. I think they thought I had too much clout with the players." With that, the Steelers traded Jefferson away to the Colts for Richardson and a 4th-round pick. It seemed like all the drama in Pittsburgh was done now that Jefferson was gone, right? Turns out, it was just getting started. The trade was a highly controversial move. Even with all the drama surrounding Jefferson, how are you giving up maybe the best receiver in football for a slightly older guy in Richardson and a 4th-round pick? Still, despite Richardson's struggles toward the end of his tenure with the Colts, I think just about everyone expected him to be the starter in Pittsburgh. The Steelers were incredibly thin at the receiver position. Besides Jefferson, in 1969, no other player on the team had more than 20 receptions. Richardson was a talented guy who would give the team a much-needed veteran presence, especially since it seemed like entering the year, the top 2 receivers on the team, Ron Shanklin and Dave Smith, were rookies. All Richardson had to do was show up, and the job was his. The only problem? Yeah, he didn't show up. When Richardson got traded, the first thing he did was contact his attorney and ask Vice President Dan Rooney to renegotiate his contract. The Steelers did not want to do this, especially in the wake of the drama between the NFL and the NFLPA in the offseason. The last thing they wanted to do was give a ton of money to a player who hadn't even taken a snap with the team. As Rooney said, "We absolutely refuse to renegotiate any contracts. It has not and never has been our policy to do so." Rooney also threatened to fine Richardson every single day that he wasn't at camp. I'd say his time in Pittsburgh was off to a really good start, especially when the head coach is saying, "I don't know where he is." When you get into the nitty-gritty of the contract details though, it gets a bit bizarre. And by a bit bizarre, I mean frustratingly bizarre. Apparently, when the trade happened, there was an oral agreement between Richardson and the Steelers that Richardson would receive an increase in money. An oral agreement. Just as a side note, because I think every law student, lawyer, and person with half a brain knows this, but somehow when NFL team did it, you never, and I mean never, especially when dealing with 6-figure contracts like this one, negotiate a contract orally. Get it in writing. I cannot stress that enough. You are a moron if you negotiate an NFL contract without any paper trail whatsoever. How the heck did this team enforce the rules in a 6-year stretch and become one of the greatest dynasties of all time when the main man responsible thought that orally negotiating a contract was a good idea? Okay, rant over. Anyways, the Steelers had no idea about this oral agreement, but decided, what the heck, let's honor this agreement that we may or may not have made. Then Richardson said, "You know what? Screw it. I want my whole contract reworked." And the Steelers drew the line there, with Rooney saying a contract is a contract, period. Just based off of everything I said, you probably have a feeling that this relationship isn't going to last very long at all. The Steelers played hardball, and that strategy seemed to work, as a few days later, Richardson reported to camp without any increase in pay. However, Chuck Noll was visibly frustrated with Richardson and how everything was playing out. He had just come off of a week-long battle with the flu, and he had no knowledge whatsoever as to where Richardson was. There was no heads up or warning or anything like that. And considering the fact that the Steelers only had 2 healthy receivers at the time, Noll was furious, saying, "We're going to look hard at the people who have been working for us." Pittsburgh was stuck, and one official said that there was no way that the trade could be voided. What was done was done. That's probably because of what happened 1 year before in a bizarre trade involving the Philadelphia Eagles and Los Angeles Rams. And you can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. When Richardson came back, he seemed eager to patch things up with Noll and company, saying that he forgot about the dispute and that he just wanted to talk to Coach Noll about playing football. However, this was not water under the bridge. Noll and the organization were still unhappy with Richardson, and Richardson was overtaken on the depth chart because of it by the youngsters. Richardson played a bit in the preseason, recording 4 receptions for 62 yards, and then not even 3 weeks after acquiring him, Noll decided to trade him away. Noel said, "I feel that Richardson is most effective when he can play regularly, and it would have been hard for him to play on this basis with the Steelers." Who did the Steelers trade Richardson to? They traded him to the Miami Dolphins in exchange for a 5th-round pick. I told you that Don Shula was going to come back and play a major part in this story later on. Shula and Richardson reunited, and Noel had one less headache on his hands to deal with. Just to recap what Pittsburgh did, they traded away the best receiver in football for a debatable top 10, but definitely top 15 receiver and a 4th-round pick, and then traded away that receiver for a 5th-round pick. On paper, this seems like a really bad bit of business for the Steelers, but that raises one final question. How did this actually work out for everyone involved? Let's start with what Richardson did in his new home in Miami. Turns out, he didn't do a whole lot. Richardson had 7 receptions for 67 yards and a touchdown. He was buried on the depth chart, primarily because in 1970, the Dolphins made another trade for a wide receiver when they stunned everyone and acquired Paul Warfield from the Cleveland Browns. You guys know how that one turned out for Miami. This wide receiver trade, however, didn't go as well, although they only had to give him a 5th-round pick. Richardson returned to the Colts in 1971, and then never played again after that season, so it seemed like the Steelers dodged a bullet. As for what the Steelers got, well, they lost Roy Jefferson, who would have an incredibly successful career, playing in the NFL for another 7 seasons and helping the Colts win Super Bowl V. The player they acquired with the initial draft pick was none other than defensive end Dwight White. White played 10 seasons in Pittsburgh, made 2 Pro Bowls, and finished his career with 55 sacks. He won 4 Super Bowls, and famously played at Super Bowl IX and recorded a safety while being incredibly sick and almost dying in a hospital bed in the days leading up to the game. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Everything worked out pretty well for Pittsburgh in the end, even if the road it took to get there was unbelievably strange. To trade a player not even 3 weeks after acquiring him is bizarre, but that's just what happened in 1970. But if there's any takeaway from this, for the love of all things good and pure in this world, do not negotiate your contracts orally without leaving some kind of paper trail, because it just leads to an unbelievably messy situation like this one. Get your official Jaguar 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Monday and Tuesday night at 9 PM Eastern for a chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at WR9 and subscribe to 60-second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.